Imagine biting into a loaf of bread, only to discover it's already covered in mold. Yet instead of throwing it away, your family simply keeps eating. Around you, someone quietly chews the bare skeleton of a fish, while a dried octopus hangs in the Mediterranean sun, waiting to become tomorrow's dinner. Was ancient Greek food really this strange? Or have thousands of years of history made us completely misunderstand what people actually ate? Tonight, we'll uncover the surprising truth behind the daily meals of one of history's greatest civilizations. Welcome back to Pillow and Poison. Tonight, we'll step into the kitchens, marketplaces, fishing villages, and dinner tables of ancient Greece, and discover what life truly tasted like over 2,500 years ago. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's travel back to the beginning. The first thing you notice isn't the sunrise, it's the hunger. Not the kind that sends you wandering to the refrigerator half asleep, wondering whether you should toast a bagel or scramble a couple of eggs. No, this hunger has been quietly waiting for you since yesterday evening. It settled into your stomach sometime after the last bite of your simple supper and never really left. You simply learned to sleep with it. As your eyes slowly open, darkness still fills most of the room. The only light comes from a tiny clay oil lamp, its flame dancing lazily as if it too wishes it could stay asleep a little longer. The room smells faintly of olive oil, damp stone, and yesterday's bread. Outside, somewhere beyond the thick mud brick walls, a rooster announces another morning in ancient Greece. You stretch carefully. The woven mat beneath you creaks softly, and a cool breeze slips through the narrow window carved high into the wall. There is no glass to keep the morning air outside. Glass windows are rare, expensive, and far beyond the reach of an ordinary household like yours. Instead, a simple wooden shutter stands half open, letting the first pale streaks of dawn drift inside. Your stomach growls again. That, more than the rooster, tells you the day has begun. If you had arrived here expecting the comforting smell of frying bacon or fresh coffee, you would be disappointed almost immediately. There is no coffee, not because someone forgot to buy it, because coffee simply doesn't exist here. The coffee bean will not reach Europe for nearly 2,000 years. There is no steaming mug waiting on the table, no espresso, no cappuccino, not even tea in the way most of us imagine it today. Instead, the house remains quiet. Someone nearby begins grinding grain with a heavy stone mill. The slow scraping sound echoes through the room in a steady rhythm that has remained unchanged for generations. It isn't loud enough to be annoying. Instead, it becomes part of the morning itself, as familiar as birds singing or waves reaching the shore. You sit up. Your breakfast isn't waiting for you. In fact, breakfast itself is a surprisingly small affair. That might sound strange to modern ears. Today we're constantly reminded that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Ancient Greeks would probably smile politely at such advice before taking another bite of plain bread. For many ordinary people, breakfast wasn't about enjoying a feast. It was simply about making it to lunchtime. That alone surprises many historians, because popular culture often imagines ancient Greece as a civilization of endless luxury. Marble temples, philosophers debating beneath sunny skies, elegant banquets overflowing with grapes and wine. Those things certainly existed, but they belonged to only a small part of society. Most people weren't philosophers. Most people weren't wealthy politicians. Most people weren't famous generals. Most people were farmers, fishermen, potters, shepherds, builders, women managing busy households, children helping their parents long before they were old enough to understand why life demanded so much work, and nearly every one of them woke up hungry. You rise from your mat and step onto the cool stone floor. Across the room, someone has already placed a rough loaf of barley bread on the wooden table. Calling it fresh might be generous. The loaf was baked yesterday, perhaps even the day before. Already its crust feels as hard as dry wood. You tap it gently with your knuckles. It answers with a dull knock. Not exactly soft, not exactly inviting, yet nobody complains. Bread isn't just food here. Bread is survival. In fact, if you were to ask an ordinary Greek what they ate yesterday, the answer might begin and end with bread. Morning, bread. Midday, bread. Evening, more bread. Modern diets celebrate variety. Ancient diets celebrated having enough. You break off a piece. It doesn't tear easily. Tiny crumbs scatter across the table, while a larger chunk finally snaps free. The inside is dense, coarse and slightly darker than modern bread, because this loaf isn't made from refined white flour. It is barley. Barley was everywhere in ancient Greece, and for a very practical reason. The Greek landscape isn't especially kind. Large parts of the country are rocky, dry, and covered with thin soil. Wheat certainly grew here, but barley proved much tougher. It tolerated poor ground better, survived difficult seasons more easily, and produced reliable harvests when wheat sometimes struggled. In other words, barley fed civilizations. It may not have tasted particularly exciting, but it kept people alive. Now comes the first surprise. Despite the thumbnail you clicked on, ordinary Greeks were not casually eating rotten food every morning. However, they also wasted almost nothing. And that's where life begins to feel very different from our own. Imagine finding a loaf of bread that's beginning to harden after several days. Imagine finding a loaf of bread that's beginning to harden after several days. Today, many people would throw it into the trash without thinking twice. In ancient Greece, that would have seemed unbelievably wasteful. Hard bread could be softened. It could be dipped into diluted wine. It could be soaked in water. It could be crumbled into soups. It could even be ground into new dishes. Food represented days of labor. Fields had to be plowed by hand, seeds scattered carefully, harvests gathered beneath the burning Mediterranean sun. Grain carried home in heavy baskets. Every loaf represented countless hours of work. Throwing bread away meant throwing away someone's effort, and perhaps tomorrow's meal. That simple idea shaped the Greek relationship with food. Waste wasn't merely unfortunate. It could be dangerous. Your fingers brush against a small clay bowl sitting beside the bread. Inside are a handful of olives, dark, wrinkled, slightly shiny with oil. You pop one into your mouth. The salt arrives first, then bitterness, then a rich flavor that lingers much longer than you expected. Olives weren't a snack. They were one of the foundations of Greek life. Olive trees covered hillsides across much of the Mediterranean. Unlike grain, which demanded constant attention, olive trees rewarded patience. Some lived for centuries, continuing to produce fruit long after the people who planted them had disappeared. It's a comforting thought. Somewhere nearby stands a tree already old when your grandparents were children. Perhaps it will still be alive when your great-grandchildren grow old themselves. The olive tree quietly ignores generations. Humans come and go. The tree simply continues. A small wedge of goat cheese sits beside the olives. Its smell is stronger than most modern supermarket cheeses. Goats thrive where cattle struggle. They climb rocky hillsides effortlessly, eating shrubs and plants cows would ignore. That made them perfect companions for Greek farmers living among rugged mountains. Their milk became cheese, and cheese became breakfast. You take a cautious bite, sharp, tangy, a little crumbly. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Another surprise waits nearby. A clay cup. You lift it. Inside isn't milk. It isn't fruit juice. It isn't water. It's wine. Or rather, wine mixed generously with water. To modern people, serving wine at breakfast might sound like the beginning of a terrible day. To an ancient Greek, it could be perfectly ordinary. Before you picture everyone stumbling through Athens half-drunk before sunrise, there's something important to understand. Greek wine wasn't usually consumed straight from the jar. Doing so was considered uncivilized, barbaric even. Instead, wine was diluted with water, sometimes 2 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes even more. The result was a much lighter drink than modern wine. It helped improve the taste of stored water, while reducing the effects of alcohol. To drink undiluted wine was sometimes viewed as something reckless. People from foreign lands might do. One ancient Greek writer even joked that only barbarians drank wine straight. Imagine explaining that at a modern dinner party. You glance back toward the loaf. It suddenly doesn't seem quite so miserable anymore. Simple? Absolutely. Luxurious? Not even close. But everything on this table exists for a reason. The bread fills your stomach. The olives provide valuable fats. The cheese offers protein. The diluted wine keeps safely stored liquid close at hand. Nothing here is random. Everything has been shaped by centuries of experience. Outside, the village is waking. Doors creak open. Donkeys shuffle along dusty paths. Somewhere a child laughs before being called back to work. Because yes, even children have work to do. Soon the farmers will head toward their fields, the fishermen toward the sea, the shepherds toward the hills. Breakfast is ending, not because everyone is full, but because the day cannot wait. And as you brush the last crumbs of barley bread from your fingers, you begin to realize something rather unexpected. The greatest civilization of philosophers, mathematicians, playwrights, and architects didn't begin its mornings with luxury. It began with hunger and a remarkably simple piece of bread. The moment you finish your last bite of barley bread, it's tempting to imagine that everyone across ancient Greece is eating exactly the same breakfast. After all, bread, olives, and a little cheese seem simple enough. But the truth is far more interesting. Your morning meal depends almost entirely on one thing: how heavy your purse feels. If you're a farmer living in a quiet village, breakfast is likely over before the sun has fully cleared the hills. A single loaf shared among the family, perhaps a few olives if last year's harvest was kind, and watered wine to wash it all down. If you're fortunate, there might be a handful of figs left from the previous season. And then it's time to work. Every minute spent lingering at the table is a minute lost in the fields, where the summer heat will soon become unbearable. Now imagine waking inside the home of a wealthy Athenian merchant. The room itself feels different. Sunlight spills across polished wooden furniture instead of rough benches, and servants are already moving quietly between the kitchen and dining area. The table is noticeably fuller. Fresh wheat bread, softer and lighter than the coarse barley loaf you've just eaten, sits beside bowls of honey, ripe figs, almonds, walnuts, and carefully prepared goat cheese. There may even be fresh fruit picked that very morning. Wealth could not buy refrigerators or supermarkets, of course, but it could buy access to better ingredients, larger farms, and traders arriving from distant islands. Breakfast is still modest by modern standards, yet compared to the average Greek household, it feels almost luxurious. One of the biggest surprises is that wheat bread itself was something of a status symbol. Today, many people choose whole grain bread because it's considered healthier, while soft white bread is available almost everywhere. In ancient Greece, the opposite impression often existed. Producing fine white flour required extra labor, better grain, and careful milling. That made wheat bread more expensive and more desirable. Most ordinary families relied on barley because it was reliable, hardy, and far easier to grow in Greece's rocky landscape. So if you found yourself enjoying a fluffy wheat loaf each morning, your neighbors would probably assume life was treating you rather well. Here's another detail that often surprises modern audiences. Breakfast wasn't always eaten sitting comfortably around a family table. Many laborers grabbed a piece of bread and started walking almost immediately. Farmers headed toward vineyards and olive groves before the morning sun grew fierce. Fishermen pushed their wooden boats into calm coastal waters while the sky still glowed pink. Builders carried heavy stone blocks toward construction sites, where temples slowly rose over many years. Food wasn't meant to slow the day down, it was fuel, plain and simple. A few bites now could mean the difference between finishing your work or collapsing from exhaustion before midday. If you happened to be a child, your breakfast looked remarkably similar to your parents'. There were no sugary cereals, chocolate spreads, or stacks of fluffy pancakes waiting to brighten the morning. Children learned very early that food was valuable. They watched their parents carefully save crumbs, reuse yesterday's bread, and preserve every edible ingredient possible. Even a simple olive carried meaning because someone had planted the tree years before the child was born. Meals quietly taught lessons about patience, gratitude, and survival long before anyone sat down to teach philosophy or mathematics. Perhaps the most surprising fact of all is that many ancient Greeks rarely expected breakfast to be exciting. Modern culture often treats food as entertainment, with endless recipes, flavors, and choices available every day. For the average Greek, familiarity was comforting rather than boring. Eating nearly the same foods day after day meant stability. It meant the harvest hadn't failed. It meant your family still had grain stored safely in large clay jars. Variety was pleasant when it appeared, but consistency was often the greater blessing. A predictable breakfast could be a quiet reminder that life, despite its hardships, was continuing as it should. As you step outside into the cool morning air, the village has fully awakened. Smoke curls gently from neighboring homes. Donkeys carry baskets toward the market, and distant voices echo through the narrow streets, somewhere beyond the rooftops. Olive trees shimmer silver-green beneath the rising sun, while fields of barley wait patiently for another day's work. Your stomach is no longer empty, but neither is it completely satisfied. That feeling is perfectly normal here. In ancient Greece, breakfast was never meant to leave you full. It was simply enough to carry you into the long hours ahead, where every loaf, every olive, and every crumb had to be earned. The sun has climbed higher now, warming the stone streets beneath your sandals as you make your way toward the heart of the city. Long before you can actually see it, you can already hear it. Voices drift through the air from every direction, merchants calling out prices, donkeys braying under heavy loads, children weaving through the crowds and somewhere nearby, the rhythmic tapping of a bronze smith shaping metal. Then as you turn the corner, it suddenly opens before you. Welcome to the Agora, the beating heart of ancient Greek life. It isn't simply a marketplace. It's where business, politics, gossip, philosophy, and everyday survival all collide in one wonderfully chaotic place. If you wanted to understand how ordinary Greeks lived, you wouldn't begin at the Parthenon. You would begin here. As you wander between the crowded stalls, the smells change every few steps. Freshly baked barley bread gives way to the salty scent of dried fish. Nearby, enormous clay jars overflow with glossy black olives glistening in olive oil. Wooden baskets are piled high with onions, garlic, lentils, figs, walnuts, and herbs gathered from the surrounding countryside. A cheesemaker proudly slices wedges of sharp goat cheese, while another merchant pours thick golden honey into small clay containers. Unlike a modern supermarket, nothing here is neatly organized. There are no refrigerated aisles, no plastic packaging, and certainly no shopping carts. Instead, every purchase begins with conversation. Bargaining is expected, and a friendly smile may save you a few precious coins. One thing immediately becomes clear. Fresh meat is surprisingly difficult to find. If you expected rows of beef, pork, and chicken like a modern butcher shop, you'll quickly realize ancient Greece worked very differently. Livestock represented wealth, labor, and future income. A goat could provide milk for years. Sheep produced valuable wool. Oxen helped plow fields that fed entire families. Slaughtering these animals simply for an ordinary weekday meal made little economic sense. For most people, meat remained a rare luxury, often reserved for religious festivals when animals were sacrificed to the gods and the meat was shared among the community. The Agora isn't only filled with food, it is overflowing with stories. A merchant from Egypt proudly displays rare spices that most shoppers can only admire from a distance. Sailors returning from distant islands exaggerate tales of dangerous storms and enormous sea creatures. Philosophers gather beneath shaded colonnades, debating questions that still puzzle us. Today, while ordinary citizens pause, just long enough to listen before continuing their errands, you might even overhear heated political arguments taking place only a few steps away from someone buying onions for dinner. Here, history isn't happening inside grand temples. It's unfolding between market stalls, over loaves of bread and beside baskets of olives. As you continue exploring, another surprising detail becomes impossible to ignore. There are no tomatoes stacked in baskets, no potatoes, no corn, no chili peppers, no chocolate, no coffee beans waiting to be roasted. Every one of those familiar foods belongs to a future still, nearly 2,000 years away. If you asked a Greek merchant where to find a tomato, he would have absolutely no idea what you were talking about. The colorful Mediterranean cuisine we enjoy today simply didn't exist yet. Instead, the market is built around ingredients that had sustained Greek families for centuries: grain, olives, legumes, cheese, fish, fruit, herbs, and honey. It's a simpler menu than many people imagine, but one that helped build one of history's most remarkable civilizations. As you finally leave the bustling Agora, your woven basket feels pleasantly heavier, filled with the ingredients for another humble meal. The noise of the marketplace begins to fade behind you, replaced once again by the distant sound of birds and the warm breeze rustling through nearby olive trees. Looking back one last time, it's easy to realize that the true wealth of ancient Greece wasn't measured only in gold or marble temples. It was measured in fertile harvests, successful fishing trips, full grain jars, and market stalls busy enough to feed an entire city. And tomorrow morning, long before the philosophers begin debating and the politicians begin arguing, these same merchants will return to do it all over again. You tighten your grip on the woven basket as you continue wandering through the Agora, and something begins to feel strangely unfamiliar. It's not the crowds or the constant chatter. It's what you don't see. There are no blocks of ice keeping fish cold, no humming refrigerators, no freezers hidden behind shop counters, and certainly no expiration dates printed neatly on packages. Every piece of food you buy today has only one mission: survive until it's eaten. That simple challenge shapes nearly everything about the ancient Greek diet. Fish caught this morning should ideally be sold before sunset. Fresh milk spoils quickly beneath the Mediterranean heat, which is why it's often turned into cheese almost immediately. Fruits are dried, olives are cured, herbs are hung from ceilings, honey lasts for years, while olive oil becomes one of the most valuable ingredients in every household. In fact, archaeologists have discovered sealed jars of honey thousands of years old that were still remarkably well preserved. Nature, it seems, had already invented one of history's greatest preservatives. As you stop beside a fish merchant, you notice him encouraging customers to buy quickly. The fresh catch glistens under the morning sun, but everyone understands the clock is ticking. If the fish doesn't sell today, it must be salted, dried, or smoked before it begins to spoil. Nothing is wasted if it can be saved. The same philosophy applies throughout the marketplace. Bread that's becoming stale is soaked into soups. Leftover olives are pressed into oil. Even vegetable scraps may find their way into stews. Throwing food away is almost unthinkable, because every ingredient represents weeks or months of hard work. To waste a meal isn't simply careless, it risks the well-being of your family. In a world without supermarkets open 24 hours a day, tomorrow's dinner depends entirely on today's careful planning. You soon realize that shopping itself requires a surprising amount of knowledge. There are no colorful labels telling you which cheese is freshest or which loaf was baked this morning. Instead, you rely on your senses. You gently squeeze the bread to judge its firmness. You smell herbs before buying them. You inspect dried fish for signs of poor preservation. Experienced shoppers know exactly which merchant produces the best olive oil and which fisherman always brings in the freshest catch. Reputation means everything. A dishonest merchant might lose customers for years after selling spoiled food just once. In many ways, the marketplace operates on trust as much as money. Money itself comes in many forms. Depending on where you live and whom you're buying from, you reach into your small leather pouch and feel a few silver coins resting inside. They are precious, and you count them carefully before making each purchase. Many ordinary families simply cannot afford to buy everything they want. Instead, they prioritize essentials: grain, olives, cheese, onions, and perhaps a little fish if prices are reasonable. Luxury items such as imported spices, expensive wines, or exotic fruits remain far beyond the reach of most shoppers. A wealthy citizen might stroll through the Agora deciding what looks appealing for dinner. An ordinary laborer enters with a strict budget already decided before leaving home. That difference quietly shapes two very different lives within the same city walls. The marketplace also reveals something else that often surprises modern visitors. Women play a quieter public role than many people expect, especially in cities like Athens. In poorer families, however, reality is much more practical. Survival matters more than social ideals, and women frequently help sell produce, purchase supplies, or work beside their husbands. Ancient Greece was never one perfectly uniform society. Customs varied from city to city, from wealthy households to humble villages, and daily life often looked very different depending on where you stood in the marketplace. As the afternoon sun begins warming the white stone buildings around you, the Agora slowly changes its rhythm. Some merchants have already sold most of their goods and begin packing away empty baskets. Others lower their prices, hoping to avoid carrying unsold food home before nightfall. Fishermen bargain more eagerly. Bakers offer discounts on loaves that won't stay fresh until tomorrow. Around you, conversations shift from buying to sharing news of the day. Someone speaks excitedly about a ship arriving from a distant island. Another whispers about an upcoming religious festival where meat will finally be plentiful. For many families, those festivals aren't just important for spiritual reasons. They may also be the only opportunity to enjoy a generous serving of roasted meat for weeks. As you leave the Agora behind, basket now comfortably filled with simple ingredients, you begin to understand that shopping in ancient Greece isn't merely about buying food. It's a daily lesson in patience, resourcefulness, and making every single crumb count. By now, you've probably started noticing a pattern. Every time you sit down to eat, the same familiar faces greet you on the table: bread, olives, cheese, perhaps a bowl of lentils if you're lucky. At first, it feels comforting, but after days, then weeks, and eventually months, you begin to understand something that every ordinary Greek already knows. Variety is a luxury. Consistency is survival. If someone from the 21st century suddenly found themselves living here, they would probably start craving pizza, noodles, burgers, or even something as simple as a bowl of rice within the first week. But for you, living in ancient Greece, those foods don't exist. Instead, your world revolves around a handful of ingredients that have quietly sustained generations. They may not seem exciting, but together, they keep an entire civilization alive. The centerpiece of nearly every meal is still bread. Yet today you notice something different. Not every loaf looks the same. Some are dark and dense, made almost entirely from barley flour, while others are lighter, softer, and clearly made with wheat. A baker proudly explains that wealthy customers often prefer fine wheat bread because its texture is smoother and its flavor milder. Meanwhile, laborers happily carry home coarse barley loaves that are heavier and far more filling. Surprisingly, archaeologists have found ancient milling stones worn smooth after decades of grinding grain by hand. Imagine the effort hidden inside every single loaf. Before breakfast ever reached your table, someone had harvested the grain, carried it home, ground it into flour using nothing but muscle, mixed the dough, gathered firewood, heated a stone oven, and finally baked the bread. Suddenly, every crumb feels far more valuable than it did before. Beside the bread sits a steaming clay bowl filled with lentils. At first glance, it doesn't look especially impressive. Brown, slightly thick and seasoned with little more than herbs, onions and olive oil, it could easily be mistaken for a very ordinary soup. But appearances are deceiving. Lentils are one of the greatest heroes of the ancient Greek kitchen. They are inexpensive, easy to store, rich in nutrients, and capable of feeding an entire family with surprisingly little effort. In fact, some historians believe lentil soup was so common that many Greeks ate it several times every single week, making it one of the closest things they had to everyday comfort food. While philosophers debated the meaning of life in Athens, countless ordinary families quietly enjoyed bowls of humble lentils without giving them a second thought. Nearby, another pot bubbles gently over the fire. This one contains chickpeas, slowly simmered until they become soft enough to mash with olive oil and herbs. Beans of all kinds are everywhere in Greece because they solve a problem meat cannot. Livestock is expensive to raise, and animals provide valuable milk, wool, or labor long before they become food. Beans, on the other hand, simply grow. They wait patiently in the soil, asking only for sunlight, rain, and time. Today, nutritionists praise legumes as part of a healthy Mediterranean diet. But ancient Greeks weren't following a fashionable eating plan. They simply relied on what the land could reliably provide. Ironically, many modern health experts now recommend eating more like these ordinary farmers, even though the farmers themselves probably dreamed of having more meat whenever they could. Olive oil appears again, almost as if it refuses to let any meal exist without it. A generous drizzle transforms plain lentils into something richer. Another splash softens coarse bread. Vegetables glisten beneath its golden color. To modern kitchens, olive oil is one ingredient among many. Here it is nearly indispensable. Families cook with it, preserve food in it, dip bread into it, and even use it for lamps after sunset. Wealth is sometimes measured not only by the number of animals you own, but also by the number of olive trees standing proudly on your land. Some of those trees were planted by grandparents who never lived to see them reach full maturity. Olive trees reward patience on a scale that few other crops can match, quietly producing harvests for generations yet to come. As lunchtime approaches, you realize something unexpected. Despite the simplicity of the food, you don't actually feel deprived. The bread fills your stomach, the lentils keep you satisfied. The olives provide richness, while the cheese adds a welcome burst of flavor. There are no complicated recipes, no overflowing buffets, and no endless choices demanding your attention. Instead, every meal feels intentional, built around ingredients that have earned their place through reliability rather than excitement. Looking around the table, you begin to understand why these foods endured for centuries. They weren't extraordinary because they were luxurious. They were extraordinary because they allowed ordinary people to survive droughts, poor harvests, hard winters, and exhausting summers. And perhaps that's the greatest recipe ancient Greece ever perfected. As the afternoon sun begins to soften, your meal isn't quite finished. There's no rich dessert cart rolling toward the table, no chocolate cake waiting in the kitchen, and certainly no ice cream hidden away for later. Instead, someone places a small woven basket in the center of the table. Inside are ripe figs, a handful of grapes, and a few wrinkled dates that have been carefully dried under the Mediterranean sun. To a modern eye, it might seem like a light snack, but here this is dessert. Fresh fruit is one of nature's greatest gifts. arriving only when the seasons allow. During harvest, families eat as much as they can. Whatever remains is dried, preserving its sweetness long after summer has disappeared. One surprising fact is that ancient Greeks loved figs so much that the fruit became one of the most important crops in the entire region, and in some cities, exporting the finest figs without permission could even lead to legal punishment. A simple fruit was valuable enough to deserve its own laws. You reach for a fig and gently pull it apart with your fingers. Its soft interior glistens with tiny seeds, releasing a rich sweetness that's far more intense than the bread and lentils you've been eating all day. Without refined sugar, your taste buds experience sweetness differently. Honey and ripe fruit are precious because they appear naturally. Not from a factory, a spoonful of honey poured over fresh goat cheese feels almost unbelievably luxurious, even though the ingredients themselves are remarkably simple. Bees are treated with great respect, and skilled beekeepers know exactly where wildflowers bloom each season. Honey isn't only food, it sweetens medicines, preserves certain ingredients, and occasionally serves as an offering to the gods. Every golden drop is collected through patience rather than machinery. Around the edge of the table lie bundles of fragrant herbs. Oregano, thyme, dill, fennel, mint, coriander, and parsley quietly transform ordinary meals without costing much at all. These herbs grow naturally across hillsides and rocky landscapes, filling the warm air with their unmistakable scent. A handful tossed into lentil soup changes the entire dish. Fresh mint brightens goat cheese, while oregano brings life to roasted fish. Modern recipes often rely on butter, cream, or rich sauces to create flavor. Ancient Greek cooks instead trusted herbs, olive oil, garlic, onions, and careful preparation. Surprisingly, many of the herbs filling your kitchen today would already feel perfectly familiar to a cook living in Athens 25 centuries ago. As evening approaches, someone places a clay bowl filled with nuts onto the table. Walnuts, almonds, and occasionally pistachios are enjoyed whenever they can be gathered or traded. They're nutritious, easy to carry during long journeys, and store well through the colder months. Children eagerly crack shells open with smooth stones, competing to find the largest nut hidden inside. Alongside them sit pomegranates, their ruby red seeds sparkling like tiny jewels whenever the thick skin is broken apart. The fruit isn't just admired for its flavor. Throughout Greek mythology, the pomegranate carries deep symbolic meaning, representing life, death, and the changing seasons. Every bite quietly connects everyday meals with stories passed from one generation to the next. Perhaps the most remarkable realization comes only after several weeks of living here. Despite the limited selection of ingredients, meals rarely feel completely identical. The changing seasons constantly reshape what's available. Spring brings tender greens. Summer offers figs and grapes. Autumn fills baskets with olives ready for pressing, while winter relies heavily on stored grain, dried legumes, preserved fish, cheese, and honey. There are no strawberries in the middle of winter because nature simply refuses the request. No cargo planes will deliver tropical fruit from another continent overnight. Every season teaches patience, reminding you that good food cannot always be rushed. In a strange way, eating becomes deeply connected to the rhythm of the earth itself. Then another thought quietly settles into your mind. You've now shared several meals in ancient Greece, and something is still missing. No tomatoes brighten the bread. No potatoes accompany the fish. No peppers add heat. No lemons squeeze fresh citrus over dinner. These familiar flavors belong to a future no Greek could possibly imagine. Yet somehow their kitchens never seem empty. Instead, they're filled with the earthy aroma of herbs, the richness of olive oil, the sweetness of honey, and the comforting simplicity of freshly baked bread. As the last rays of sunlight disappear beyond the olive groves, you lean back from the table feeling pleasantly satisfied. By now you've grown surprisingly comfortable. with the daily rhythm of ancient Greek meals. The barley bread no longer feels unusual. The olives have become familiar companions. And even the sharp flavor of goat cheese has begun to grow on you. But just when you think you've figured out what people here eat, someone places an unfamiliar dish in front of you. It isn't decorated with herbs or surrounded by colorful vegetables. It's simply a whole octopus, hanging from a wooden rack outside before being brought to the table. At first glance, it looks almost inedible. Its tentacles are curled tightly, its skin leathery from hours beneath the Mediterranean sun. And yet everyone around you seems perfectly pleased. They slice pieces from it with practiced hands, dip them into olive oil, and continue eating as if this were the most ordinary meal imaginable. For them it is. For you it might take a little courage. Earlier that morning, you watched fishermen returning to shore while the sky was still painted in shades of pink and gold. Their wooden boats carried baskets filled with sardines, anchovies, squid, and octopus caught only hours before. But here's the surprising part. Fresh doesn't always mean better. Instead of cooking the octopus immediately, many fishermen deliberately leave it hanging under the sun. The warm sea breeze slowly dries the flesh while naturally breaking down tough muscle fibers, making it more tender when finally cooked. Even today, in parts of Greece, you'll still see octopuses hanging outside seaside tavernas exactly as they did thousands of years ago. It's one of those remarkable traditions that has survived the rise and fall of entire civilizations, quietly connecting modern Greece with its ancient past. As you continue your meal, another dish quietly appears, a bowl of small land snails, collected from rocky hillsides after seasonal rains. At first, they hardly seem worth the effort. They're tiny, carefully cleaned, then slowly cooked with olive oil and fragrant herbs until tender. To many modern visitors, the idea of eating snails sounds like something reserved for survival. Yet here, nobody considers them strange. Snails are simply another gift from the landscape, especially during years when larger sources of protein are scarce. Children help gather them after wet weather, carrying woven baskets into the countryside while learning exactly which varieties are safe to eat. What seems unusual to outsiders is simply common knowledge, passed down through generations. Then your attention shifts to the fish. Not the beautiful grilled fillets served in modern restaurants, but small fish laid neatly across the table, many of them eaten almost completely. Heads, tails, tiny bones, very little goes to waste. You watch as someone patiently separates each delicate piece of meat before crunching through the softer bones without hesitation. It looks surprising at first, yet it makes perfect sense. Perhaps the greatest shock isn't any single ingredient, but the complete absence of waste. There are no overflowing garbage bins waiting behind the kitchen. Bread that grows hard becomes soup. Fish bones may flavor broths. Vegetable scraps feed animals or enrich the soil. Olive pits become fuel for small fires. Every object seems to find a second purpose before finally disappearing. Modern households throw away astonishing amounts of food each year without a second thought. Here, wasting perfectly edible food would seem almost unimaginable. It isn't because ancient Greeks enjoyed hardship. It's because they understood something we often forget. Every meal begins long before it reaches the table, with months of planting, harvesting, fishing, carrying, grinding, and cooking. Looking down at the humble dishes before you, you realize these meals aren't strange because of what they contain. They're strange because they reveal a world where nothing, not even the smallest crumb, is ever taken for granted. As the evening grows quieter, you notice something that feels almost impossible by modern standards. Dinner has ended, yet almost nothing remains on the table. There are no half-eaten plates waiting to be scraped into the trash. No forgotten slices of bread slowly turning stale on the counter. Every olive has been picked clean. Every spoonful of lentils has disappeared. Even the smallest crumbs are gathered with careful fingers and eaten At first it seems like remarkable table manners, but after living here for a while, you realize it has nothing to do with politeness. It's about survival. Every grain of barley was planted by hand, harvested beneath a scorching summer sun, carried home in heavy sacks, ground into flour with hours of exhausting labor, and finally baked over a wood-fired oven. Throwing even a small piece away would almost feel like disrespecting everyone who worked. To put it there, that philosophy extends far beyond bread. A wheel of goat cheese is never expected to remain perfectly fresh forever. As days pass, it grows firmer, saltier, and develops a stronger aroma. To modern noses, the smell might seem overwhelming, but to ancient Greeks, it simply means the cheese is aging. In many households, stronger cheese is actually appreciated because it lasts longer and develops a richer flavor. There is no panic over an expiration date printed on colorful packaging. Those don't exist. Instead, families rely on experience, smell, texture, and generations of knowledge to decide what is still perfectly safe to eat. Some traditional Greek cheeses are still intentionally aged for months, proving that what one culture calls old, another may call perfect. The same practical thinking applies to seafood. Earlier, you watched octopuses hanging beneath the Mediterranean sun, and now you understand why. Drying isn't a sign that the food has gone bad. It's exactly what prevents it from spoiling. Fish receive the same treatment. Some are packed generously with salt, others are smoked over slow-burning fires, and many are carefully dried until they can survive long journeys without refrigeration. Imagine preparing for winter without a freezer or an electric refrigerator. Preservation isn't a hobby here. It's one of the most important survival skills a family can possess. Every successful harvest must somehow last until the next one arrives, and every preserved fish represents security against uncertain days ahead. Then comes another surprising discovery. While exploring the kitchen, you notice jars tucked neatly along the shelves, each one filled with something different. One contains olives resting beneath a layer of fragrant olive oil. Another is packed with dried herbs gathered during the warmer months. Nearby sits a clay pot of honey that seems almost untouched by time. Unlike many foods, honey rarely spoils when stored properly. Archaeologists have uncovered sealed pots of honey inside ancient Egyptian tombs that remained edible after thousands of years. And although those jars came from Egypt rather than Greece, Greek families understood the same remarkable property of honey. To them, honey wasn't simply a sweet treat. It was nature's own preservative, medicine and luxury ingredient all at once. Perhaps the strangest realization arrives when you think about the word fresh. Today, many of us assume fresh is always best. But in ancient Greece, fresh isn't necessarily the goal. A freshly caught fish is wonderful if you plan to eat it immediately. A freshly baked loaf is delightful while it's still warm. Yet much of daily life depends on foods that have been intentionally transformed. Cheese aged over weeks, olives cured in brine, grapes dried into raisins, herbs hung from ceilings, and octopus left to dry in the sea breeze. Time itself becomes another ingredient. Instead of fearing it, ancient Greeks learned to work alongside it, allowing nature to preserve what the family cannot consume right away. As darkness settles over the village, the last oil lamp flickers beside the empty table. There is no overflowing trash bin waiting outside the door, because there is almost nothing to throw away. Every meal has been stretched as far as possible, every ingredient respected, every leftover given another purpose. It's a way of life that might seem unfamiliar to many of us, yet it's also deeply humbling. In a world where convenience often encourages waste, the people of ancient Greece quietly mastered a different philosophy, one built on gratitude, patience, and resourcefulness. And perhaps that's the most surprising food lesson they leave behind. After spending several days in ancient Greece, you've probably noticed something rather strange. You've eaten plenty of bread, olives, cheese, lentils, figs, and fish. But where is the meat? Surely one of history's greatest. Civilizations enjoyed enormous feasts of roasted lamb every evening. Movies certainly make it look that way. Great kings sit at long wooden tables piled high with roasted animals. Servants constantly refill goblets of wine, and everyone seems to have more food than they could possibly finish. It makes for an exciting scene. The only problem is that for the vast majority of ancient Greeks, it wasn't reality. If you were an ordinary farmer, shepherd, potter, or fisherman, meat wasn't something you expected to see every day. In fact, it was something you hoped for. There was a good chance that weeks would pass without a single proper serving appearing on your plate. The reason wasn't that Greeks disliked meat. Quite the opposite. Meat was highly valued because animals themselves were incredibly valuable while they were still alive. A goat wasn't simply dinner. It provided milk almost every day. Sheep produced wool that kept your family warm through the colder months. Oxen pulled heavy plows across rocky fields, making it possible to grow the barley that fed entire villages. Even chickens offered eggs long before they ever became food. Slaughtering a healthy animal meant giving up months, or even years, of future benefits. It was a decision no sensible household made lightly. Every animal represented an investment, and keeping it alive usually made far more economic sense than roasting it over a fire for one satisfying meal. As you walk through a small farming village, the sound of bleating goats echoes across the hillsides. Shepherds guide their flocks carefully between patches of dry grass, while children help keep curious animals from wandering too far. Looking around, you suddenly realize something that modern visitors often overlook. These animals aren't being raised primarily for steaks or chops. They're living tools that help an entire household survive. The goats provide milk that becomes cheese. Sheep offer wool for clothing and blankets. Oxen make farming possible. Even donkeys carry heavy baskets of grain and olive jars between villages. Every creature has a purpose long before anyone imagines placing it on the dinner table. Historians estimate that for many ordinary Greek families, dairy products contributed far more to the daily diet than meat itself. That doesn't mean meat never appears. It simply arrives under very different circumstances than you might expect. One afternoon, excitement spreads quickly through the village. Neighbors begin sweeping doorways, preparing tables and putting on cleaner clothing. Children run through the streets, asking eager questions while the smell of burning wood slowly fills the air. Something special is happening today. A religious festival is about to begin. Throughout ancient Greece, festivals honoring the gods are among the few occasions when large numbers of people have the opportunity to eat freshly roasted meat. Animals are offered as sacred sacrifices, with portions dedicated to the gods, while the remaining meat is carefully divided among priests, officials, and ordinary citizens. For many families, these celebrations are remembered not only for their religious importance, but because they provide one of the richest meals of the entire year. As the ceremony unfolds, the atmosphere feels nothing like an ordinary dinner. Smoke rises toward the sky as prayers are spoken aloud. Musicians play simple melodies, while crowds gather respectfully around the altar. The smell of roasting lamb fills the warm Mediterranean air, making empty stomachs rumble almost immediately. You notice the anticipation on everyone's faces. This isn't routine. It's an event. Children who rarely taste meat watch patiently as adults prepare generous portions to be shared among the community. Some historians even suggest that religious sacrifice served an important social purpose. Beyond worship, it helped distribute valuable meat throughout the population in a fair and organized way. Without these public ceremonies, many ordinary citizens might have eaten meat even less frequently than they already did. As evening approaches, someone finally places a small piece of roasted lamb onto your wooden plate. It isn't enormous. There are no towering portions or overflowing platters. In fact, compared to a modern restaurant serving, it feels surprisingly modest. Yet the people around you receive it with genuine gratitude. They savor each bite slowly, appreciating both its flavor and the rare opportunity it represents. Watching them, you begin to understand that in ancient Greece, meat wasn't ordinary food. It was celebration. It marked festivals, honored the gods, strengthened communities, and reminded everyone just how precious a single shared meal could be. The morning after the festival feels strangely familiar again. The excitement has faded, the smell of roasted lamb has disappeared, and the village quietly returns to its ordinary rhythm. If you were hoping yesterday's feast would become a daily tradition, you're in for disappointment. The leftover meat is carefully divided among family members, and before long it's gone. Tomorrow's breakfast will once again be bread, olives, perhaps a little cheese, and whatever else the household can afford. It becomes clear that meat was never meant to be an everyday luxury. Instead, the people of ancient Greece relied on something far more dependable, the sea. For those living near the coast, fish wasn't just another food. It became the closest thing they had to everyday meat. As you walk toward the harbor just after sunrise, fishermen are already returning from hours spent at sea. Their small wooden boats rock gently against the docks, loaded with sardines, anchovies, mackerel, squid, and octopus. The catch is quickly sorted into woven baskets before merchants hurry them toward the Agora. Unlike sheep or goats, fish require no pasture, no expensive feed, and no years of care before becoming food. The sea provides them freely, although never without hard work. Storms, dangerous currents, and unpredictable weather constantly remind fishermen that every successful catch is earned. Still, compared with raising livestock, fishing offers ordinary families a much more realistic source of protein. The fish themselves are rarely the large fillets many of us expect today. Most are surprisingly small. Sardines and anchovies are especially common because they travel in enormous schools and are easier to catch in large numbers. You watch a woman carefully prepare dinner by roasting several tiny fish over glowing charcoal. Nothing fancy is added, just a drizzle of olive oil, a sprinkle of herbs, and perhaps a squeeze of vinegar if it's available. When the meal is served, something immediately catches your attention. Nobody leaves much behind. Heads, tails, and even many of the tiny bones are eaten. Modern nutritionists would probably approve, since those small edible bones contain valuable calcium. Even though ancient Greeks had no idea what calcium was, they simply understood that wasting food made little sense. Of course, not everyone lives beside the sea. Venture farther inland, and fresh fish becomes harder to find. That's where preservation once again changes everything. Salted fish, smoked fish, and dried fish travel surprisingly well across Greece's rugged mountains. Merchants carry them on donkeys from coastal towns to villages many miles away, where families happily exchange grain, olive oil, or pottery in return. The flavor is much stronger than fresh fish, saltier, firmer, and sometimes intensely pungent, but it provides nourishment long after the fishing boats have disappeared over the horizon. In many inland homes, preserved fish is considered every bit as valuable as fresh meat. As the day continues, you begin to notice another surprising pattern. Even wealthy Greeks don't necessarily eat enormous amounts of meat every day. Yes, they enjoy better cuts, more frequent banquets, and a greater variety of dishes than ordinary citizens. But their tables are still filled with bread, olives, cheese, fruit, vegetables, legumes, and seafood. The foundation of the Greek diet remains remarkably similar across social classes. Wealth changes the quality and variety of ingredients, not the basic philosophy of eating. This simple, plant-rich way of eating has become one of the reasons modern scientists often point to the traditional Mediterranean diet as one of the healthiest dietary patterns in the world. Ironically, what many people today deliberately choose for health was simply everyday necessity for ancient Greeks. As the sun slowly sinks toward the horizon, fishermen pull their empty boats onto the shore while families gather for another quiet evening meal. There is no expectation of roasted lamb tonight, and no one seems disappointed. Fresh bread is broken, olives are passed from hand to hand, a few small fish are shared among the table, and laughter drifts into the warm evening air. You realize that the true secret of ancient Greek food was never extravagant feasts or endless portions of meat. It was balance, patience, and making the most of whatever the land and sea were willing to provide. In a world where luxury was rare, gratitude became one of the most important ingredients at every meal. By now you've probably become comfortable with the food of ancient Greece. The barley bread no longer feels unusual. The olives have become strangely addictive, and you've even learned to appreciate the sharp bite of aged goat cheese. But just as you begin to think you've mastered the customs of the dinner table, someone reaches for a large painted clay vessel sitting in the center of the room. It is filled with deep red wine, rich in color and carrying the sweet aroma of ripe grapes. Naturally, you assume someone will pour it directly into your cup. After all, that's how wine works, isn't it? But instead, everyone watches as another guest calmly lifts a jug of water and begins pouring it into the wine. More water follows than wine. The two liquids swirl together until the rich crimson color becomes noticeably lighter. Nobody seems surprised. In fact, they look perfectly satisfied. If you had reached for the wine before it was diluted, the room might have fallen uncomfortably silent. To a modern visitor, watering down wine sounds almost disrespectful. Today, wine lovers proudly discuss full-bodied flavors, delicate aromas, and the perfect vintage. Ancient Greeks viewed the drink from an entirely different perspective. Wine was rarely meant to be consumed at full strength. It was almost always mixed with water before anyone took a sip. The exact ratio varied from household to household, but many preferred 2 or even 3 parts water for every part wine. The result wasn't a weak imitation of wine, it was the proper way to drink it. One ancient Greek writer famously remarked that drinking unmixed wine was something only barbarians would do, believing civilized people always diluted it first. Imagine attending a dinner party today and being judged simply because you forgot to add water to your glass. There were practical reasons behind this unusual custom. Ancient Greek wine was often much stronger, thicker and sweeter than many modern table wines. It wasn't filtered with modern technology, and some wines were concentrated enough to be stored for long periods before being mixed with water when served. Dilution made the flavor smoother, reduced the alcohol content, and encouraged guests to enjoy long conversations without becoming hopelessly intoxicated. Water itself could sometimes taste unpleasant after sitting in storage jars, so adding wine improved both flavor and safety. Rather than encouraging drunkenness, the custom actually promoted moderation. A gathering was expected to last for hours, sometimes well into the night, and nobody wanted it ruined by someone who had emptied several cups of undiluted wine too quickly. As another cup is handed to you, you take a cautious sip. It's lighter than expected, almost refreshing after the warmth of the afternoon. Around you, conversation flows as easily as the wine itself. Friends discuss politics, merchants share stories from distant islands, and an elderly man begins recalling memories of battles fought decades earlier. Nobody is rushing through their drink. Instead, each cup seems to mark another chapter in the evening's conversation. Unlike many modern social gatherings, where alcohol often becomes the center of attention, here the wine quietly supports something far more important: the company gathered around the table. Then someone points toward the large decorated bowl standing proudly in the middle of the room. This isn't an ordinary serving vessel. It's called a crater, and it plays a central role in every respectable gathering. Wine and water are mixed inside it before being ladled carefully into individual cups. No one pours directly from a wine jar into their own goblet. That would seem uncivilized. The crater symbolizes order, self-control, and shared hospitality. Archaeologists have uncovered beautifully painted craters, decorated with scenes of heroes, gods, musicians, and everyday life, revealing just how important these vessels were in Greek culture. Some are so large they could hold dozens of liters of diluted wine, enough to keep an entire evening of conversation flowing without interruption. As twilight settles over the rooftops, another realization quietly takes shape. The wine itself is important, but not nearly as important as what happens while people are drinking it. Every carefully mixed cup invites another story, another debate, another laugh shared among friends. In ancient Greece, wine isn't simply a beverage. It's a social ritual, a symbol of moderation, and a reminder that the best evenings aren't remembered because of how much people drank, but because of the conversations that unfolded around the table long after the sun had disappeared beyond the olive trees. As darkness settles over the city, your evening is far from over. In fact, for some Greeks, it is only just beginning. A servant quietly lights more oil lamps, filling the room with a warm golden glow that dances across painted walls and marble columns. Soft music from a lyre drifts through the air while guests begin removing their sandals before entering the dining room. But something immediately catches your attention. There are no dining chairs lined neatly around a large table. Instead, low couches surround the room, each covered with woven cushions. One by one, the guests recline comfortably on their left side, supporting themselves with one elbow while eating and drinking with the other hand. If you instinctively sit upright in a chair, you might receive a few puzzled looks. Tonight, you've been invited to a symposium, one of the most famous social traditions in ancient Greece. Despite what many modern movies suggest, a symposium isn't simply an excuse to drink wine. It's a carefully organized evening centered around conversation, entertainment, and ideas. After enjoying a modest meal, the guests settle in for hours of discussion that might wander from politics and philosophy to poetry, astronomy, or the latest gossip from across the Aegean Sea. One man wonders whether courage can truly be taught. Another argues passionately about the nature of justice. Someone recites a newly written poem, while others quietly listen with cups of diluted wine in their hands. Some of the greatest philosophical conversations in history, including those recorded by Plato, were imagined as taking place during symposia, proving that these gatherings shaped far more than simple friendships. They helped shape Western philosophy itself. Of course, not every symposium is filled with famous thinkers. Many are lively, playful, and full of laughter. Musicians perform gentle melodies, while skilled entertainers tell stories from Greek mythology. Guests challenge one another with riddles or memory games, and occasionally someone begins singing old songs everyone knows by heart. One particularly popular game is called octopus, in which players flick the last drops of wine from their drinking cups toward a distant target, competing to hit it with surprising accuracy. It sounds almost childish, yet it becomes one of the evening's greatest sources of laughter. Imagine attending an elegant dinner party, today only to discover that everyone ends the night by throwing tiny splashes of wine across the room in a friendly competition. Not everyone, however, is welcome at these gatherings. Most traditional symposia are attended almost exclusively by free adult men. Women of respectable households generally remain at home, while musicians and professional entertainers may be invited to perform during the evening. The customs vary from city to city and across different periods of Greek history, but the symposium largely reflects the social structure of its time. It isn't simply about food or drink. It's also a place where friendships are strengthened, political alliances quietly develop, and influential ideas begin spreading long before they're ever written down. As the hours pass, you notice something surprisingly disciplined. Although wine continues flowing from the crater, nobody seems eager to lose control. The host often decides how strong each mixture should be, carefully balancing conversation with moderation. Drinking too much isn't admired. It risks making you appear foolish in front of everyone present. Ancient Greek writers frequently warned that excessive drinking clouded the mind, while moderation reflected wisdom and self-control. For a civilization that deeply valued reason, keeping a clear head was considered just as important as enjoying good company. Eventually, the final cups are emptied. The musicians begin packing away their instruments, and guests slowly rise from their couches. Outside, the streets of Athens have grown quiet beneath a sky filled with stars. As you step into the cool night air, you realize the symposium was never truly about wine. The diluted drink, the shared meal, the music, and the games all served a greater purpose: to bring people together in thoughtful conversation. In ancient Greece, some of history's most enduring ideas weren't born in grand temples or royal palaces. They emerged in rooms just like this one, where friends recline side by side, speaking freely beneath the gentle glow of oil lamps long into the night. As you've settled into life in ancient Greece, something begins to feel oddly familiar. The meals are simple, the people are welcoming, and the rhythm of each day has become almost comforting. But then one afternoon, a thought suddenly crosses your mind. You haven't seen a single tomato, not sliced beside the cheese, not cooked into a stew, not growing in anyone's garden. Curious, you ask a nearby farmer where he keeps them. He pauses for a moment, tilts his head, and gives you a puzzled smile. It's the same reaction you'd probably have if someone asked where you grew vegetables from another planet. To him, the word tomato means absolutely nothing. That's because tomatoes won't arrive in Europe for nearly 2,000 more years. Every colorful Greek salad you've ever eaten belongs to a future these people cannot even imagine. As you continue walking through the marketplace, the realization becomes almost amusing. There are no potatoes stacked in baskets beside the onions, no sweet corn roasting over charcoal, no bright red chili peppers adding heat to a stew, no pumpkins, peanuts, vanilla, cocoa, or sunflowers. Even the lemons you might expect to find growing under the warm Mediterranean sun are nowhere to be seen. Most of these foods originate in the Americas and will remain completely unknown to ancient Greece until long after Christopher Columbus crosses the Atlantic in 1492. In other words, nearly half of the ingredients found in many modern Mediterranean recipes simply did not exist in the Greek world. It's a startling reminder that what we often think of as traditional cuisine has changed dramatically over the centuries. Perhaps the biggest surprise of all is the complete absence of chocolate. Imagine finishing dinner without a square of dark chocolate, a warm brownie, or even a simple chocolate drink. Cocoa trees grow thousands of miles away in Central and South America, completely beyond the imagination of Greek sailors. If you tried explaining chocolate to a baker in Athens, you would have quite a challenge. It's sweet, you'd begin. It comes from beans, but not the kind you put in soup. The baker would probably stare at you with polite confusion before offering you another spoonful of honey instead. And honestly, that honey would likely be the sweetest thing most Greeks ever tasted. Then you remember something else missing. From every morning you've spent coffee. Every sunrise begins with bread and diluted wine rather than the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Tea, at least in the way many people enjoy it today, is also absent. There are herbal infusions made from local plants, but no black tea from Asia, no green tea ceremonies, and certainly no cafes filled with people discussing philosophy over espresso. It's rather ironic, isn't it? The civilization that gave the world so many philosophical ideas never experienced the simple pleasure of sitting in a coffee shop. Those cafes would not become part of Greek life until many centuries later. Without sugar, desserts remain wonderfully simple. Honey is the undisputed king of sweetness. Fresh figs, ripe grapes, dates, and raisins satisfy cravings that modern people often solve with candy or pastries. A spoonful of honey drizzled over soft goat cheese feels almost luxurious because sweetness is relatively rare. When your taste buds aren't constantly surrounded by refined sugar, even ordinary fruit tastes astonishingly rich. Modern scientists estimate that many people today consume dozens of teaspoons of added sugar every single day. An ordinary Greek would probably find such a diet almost unimaginable and perhaps a little overwhelming. As the evening sky begins glowing orange above the olive groves, you look once more at the humble dinner spread before you. Bread, olives, lentils, cheese, herbs, fish, figs, and honey. That's the world of flavors available to ancient Greece. It may sound limited compared with modern kitchens overflowing with ingredients from every continent. Yet somehow these simple foods nourished artists, mathematicians, soldiers, sailors, playwrights, and philosophers whose ideas still shape our lives today. Perhaps greatness never depended on having endless choices at the dinner table. Sometimes a civilization grows strongest by learning to make extraordinary use of the few ingredients it already has. As night falls over the village, the family gathers once again around the familiar wooden table. The meal waiting for you looks almost identical to yesterday's, and perhaps even the day before that. There is fresh barley bread, a bowl of lentil stew slowly steaming beside a small clay lamp, a handful of olives glistening with olive oil, slices of sharp goat cheese, and a few dried figs resting on a woven plate. It feels comforting now, almost predictable. But then you begin imagining something impossible. What if you placed a modern cheeseburger right in the middle of this table? Or a slice of pizza covered in tomatoes and mozzarella? Perhaps a plate of French fries with ketchup? The family would gather around it with complete bewilderment. They might recognize the bread, but everything else would seem almost magical. The bright red tomatoes, the melted cheese made from cow's milk, the potatoes, the ketchup, even the soft sesame bun would all appear to have come from another world. In many ways, they would have. One by one, you begin realizing just how many everyday foods are completely absent from ancient Greece. There are no oranges waiting in fruit baskets, no lemons squeezed over grilled fish, and no rice steaming inside clay pots. Even pasta, which many people immediately associate with Mediterranean cooking, has no place here. There are no bananas from tropical plantations, no vanilla flavoring for desserts, and certainly no peanut butter spread across warm bread. If an ordinary Greek somehow traveled into a modern supermarket, historians believe they would fail to recognize a remarkable percentage of the products lining the shelves. They would understand olives, bread, cheese, fish, and honey, but aisle after aisle would feel like an astonishing collection of foods from an unknown future. Yet perhaps the greatest surprise is not what they're missing, but what they never miss at all. Nobody sits around wishing for chocolate because no one has ever tasted it. No child dreams about French fries because potatoes have never existed in their imagination. You cannot crave something you've never known. Instead, happiness is measured differently. A particularly sweet fig harvested at just the right moment feels like a wonderful gift. Fresh goat cheese made that morning is enough to brighten an ordinary meal. A generous drizzle of olive oil over warm bread brings genuine satisfaction. Luxury isn't defined by endless variety. It comes from enjoying familiar foods at their very best. As you spend your final evening in ancient Greece, another realization quietly settles in. This civilization managed to build magnificent temples, write timeless plays, develop groundbreaking ideas in mathematics and philosophy, and create one of history's first democratic systems, all without coffee to keep them awake, chocolate to reward themselves, or potatoes to fill their stomachs. It's a humorous thought, but also a surprisingly powerful one. Some of humanity's greatest achievements were accomplished without many of the foods we now consider indispensable. Their daily lives were built not on abundance, but on resilience, routine, and an intimate understanding of the natural world around them. You step outside as the stars begin appearing one by one above the quiet olive groves. A cool breeze carries the distant scent of the sea, while somewhere in the darkness, a shepherd calls softly to his flock. The village slowly falls asleep, preparing to wake before dawn and repeat the same timeless routine once again. Tomorrow's breakfast will almost certainly be bread, olives, perhaps a little cheese, and watered wine, just as it was yesterday, and likely as it will be tomorrow. There is a quiet beauty in that simplicity. The people of ancient Greece never knew tomatoes. Potatoes, chocolate, coffee, or countless other foods that fill our kitchens today. Now that you've spent time exploring the markets, kitchens, fishing villages, and dinner tables of ancient Greece, a question naturally begins to form in your mind. Could you actually survive eating this way every day? Not for a weekend. Not as part of a trendy diet challenge, but day after day, month after month, year after year. Could you wake up every morning knowing breakfast would probably be bread, olives, and perhaps a little cheese? Could you go weeks without a proper serving of meat? Could you live in a world without coffee, chocolate, potatoes, or sugar? Tonight we're about to find out. Imagine your day beginning just before sunrise. The room is still cool from the night air, and the first sounds of the village are beginning to drift through the window. Your breakfast is waiting on the table: a piece of barley bread, a handful of olives, a small portion of goat cheese, and a cup of diluted wine. At first glance, it doesn't seem like much. In fact, compared to many modern breakfasts, it looks surprisingly small. There are no stacks of pancakes, no sweet pastries, and no giant bowls of cereal. Yet as you eat, you begin to notice something important. The bread is dense and filling. The olives provide richness. The cheese adds protein and fat. It's a simple meal, but it was designed for people who expected to spend the entire day working with their hands. Farmers, fishermen, builders, and shepherds needed food that lasted. By midday, hunger begins returning. The morning's work has been demanding. Whether you've been tending olive trees, repairing fishing nets, carrying water, or walking behind a plow beneath the Mediterranean sun, lunch is often modest: a bowl of lentils, chickpeas, or bean stew served with more bread and perhaps a little olive oil. To modernize, it may sound repetitive, but nutritionally it's surprisingly effective. Legumes provide protein, fiber, and energy, while bread supplies carbohydrates needed for long hours of labor. Modern nutrition researchers often point out that legumes are among the healthiest foods on Earth, yet many people today eat far fewer of them than ordinary Greeks did over 2,000 years ago. Without realizing it, ancient Greeks were consuming many foods that modern dietitians now encourage people to eat more frequently. As the afternoon passes, you might snack on figs, grapes, nuts, or a small piece of cheese if such foods are available. There are no vending machines offering candy bars, no convenience stores waiting around the corner, and no delivery apps bringing food directly to your door. Every snack must come from ingredients already stored at home or carried with you during the day. Strangely enough, this changes your relationship with hunger. Instead of constantly reaching for food whenever you're slightly hungry, you learn patience. Meals become more meaningful because they require preparation, planning, and effort. Then evening finally arrives. The family gathers around the table for the largest meal of the day. There may be lentil stew again, accompanied by bread, olives, herbs, onions, and perhaps some fish if the catch was good. On special occasions, meat appears, but not often. What surprises you most is how naturally everyone accepts this. Nobody complains that dinner isn't exciting enough. Nobody insists on trying a completely different cuisine tomorrow night. The meal serves its purpose. It nourishes the family, creates time together, and prepares everyone for another day. Some historians estimate that plant-based foods made up the overwhelming majority of calories consumed by ordinary Greeks, making their diet far more vegetable-focused than many modern diets. As darkness settles over the countryside and the oil lamps begin flickering inside nearby homes, you take a moment to reflect on everything you've eaten today. By modern standards, the menu seems limited, yet your body feels surprisingly satisfied. The food was simple, yes, but it was also rich in fiber, healthy fats, legumes, fruits, and minimally processed ingredients. There were no sugary drinks, no ultra-processed snacks, and very little excess. Living on an ancient Greek diet would certainly require giving up many comforts of modern life. You would miss coffee, chocolate, and countless favorite foods. But perhaps the bigger challenge wouldn't be the ingredients themselves. It would be learning to embrace a world where meals followed the seasons. Variety was rare, and every loaf of bread represented the hard work of many hands. And as you prepare for one final evening in ancient Greece, another question begins to emerge. Was this simple diet actually healthier than the way many of us eat today? That is exactly what we'll explore next. And perhaps the next time you pour olive oil over warm bread, enjoy a handful of olives, or drizzle honey onto fresh cheese, you'll remember that these simple flavors have connected people across the Mediterranean for well over 2,000 years. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey into the kitchens and dinner tables of ancient Greece. If you enjoyed traveling through history at this slower pace, there are many more forgotten worlds waiting to explore together. For now, let the sounds of the ancient countryside grow quieter. Let the warm glow of the oil lamp slowly fade, and let your thoughts drift gently beneath the same stars that once shone over Athens, Sparta, and countless small villages whose names have long been forgotten. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next journey through history.